Hi everybody, this is Anne. There are infinite ways to design a unique pot. The particular design you choose can give it a certain personality and attitude, so it's a good idea to use your imagination to find shapes and forms that convey your own style. One design idea is to experiment with different ways to manipulate the rim. In this video, I'll show you 5 easy decorating techniques you can apply to the rims of your pots to make them distinctive. The first rim we're calling the bow tie. I started by throwing a jar on the wheel. I let it dry to leather hard. This technique involves attaching bits of clay, so I begin by rolling small balls of clay about the size of peas. The number of balls will depend on the width of the opening. I suggest a small batch of about 10 balls to begin with so they don't dry out when you move through the next stages. My goal is to convert these balls into flatter teardrop shapes. To do this, I take the end of my paintbrush and push it into the center of the ball. This will splay out the clay so it has 2 ends. I gently push the ends together to create that petal shape. I'm not worried that the ends are connected or even that they're exactly the same size. I can adjust that later. To attach these, I wet the soft rim where I'll attach the first petal. I place the petal down with the ends on the rim and the bulbous side facing towards the mouth of the pot. I push the ends into the rim for a good attachment. I then alternated the petals to the different sides. I continued these steps, alternating the petals so they created bow ties around the rim. The little petals are soft, so you can manipulate them if you need to reposition something or clean up the sharp edges. I like to use a small paintbrush, which is more exacting than my fingers. Now here's one I made earlier. When the rim was dry, I cleaned up all the clay crumbs and fingerprints. I used that same wet paintbrush to slake down the clay for a nice smooth appearance. Don't forget to look under the petals, as it'll need the most slaking down, especially if you use slip for the attachment. Jim decorated this jar with chattering. I think the alternate placement of each teardrop works together to create movement and reflect the rhythmic chattering along the body of the jar. Very dynamic. The next piece I'll demonstrate is a peekaboo rim. Again, I started with a jar I threw on the wheel that was still very soft. I want to divide the rim into sixths, so I got out my trimming spinner, which has the sixth divided with red marks on the rim. I centered it over the mouth of the jar. I then marked the rim in conjunction with each red mark. Next, I rolled out a thin slab about 1/8 of an inch thick. I ribbed it smooth on both sides. I created this V-shaped template, the width of about 1/4 of an inch wide. Using an X-Acto blade, I cut the template out 6 times. I used my wet fingers along the edges to gently soften and bevel them. I placed the point of the V-shaped template piece along one of the marks, over the rim, and each arm of the V parallel along each side. I needed to cut the length of the arms as they're longer than I wanted. I marked each arm a little longer than that neighboring rim mark. I took it off the pot, then cut the excess clay away. I then wet the rim and pressed only the arms to join to the sides of the pot. I raised the crux of that V off of the rim for now. I worked the edges of each arm into the sides of the pot and smoothed them down. I continued these steps of cutting down the arms of the next V's and attaching them. This time I did connect the pointed ends down over the previous V. I slowly worked each template piece until I got to the last one. That one, I tucked the ends under that beginning V, then worked the point down over those arms. I like that you could still see a little bit of the rim through the woven part. Here's one I made earlier where I created facets along the body to continue a form of that peekaboo effect. I love that drape appearance from the side that pushes your eye down to the facets, which in turn continues that line. I decided to contrast that with offsetting texture and color in each horizontal band around it. I just love that look. This next one we're calling ribbon folding. I began with a thrown pot that is stiffened a little bit but still soft. Again, I rolled out a soft 1/8 inch deep slab. I cut out long, straight, 1/4 inch wide strips of clay. I attached one end of the strip to a dowel rod, then began rolling the clay onto the dowel. If the clay begins to crack, wet it down more to soften it. When I got to the end, I wet the clay and attached it to the dowel. I used an X-Acto knife to cut through the center of the entire row. I placed the dowel onto my pastry mat and worked the edges away from the dowel. This creates even strips for the next step of the technique. With wet fingers, I wet the edges of the pot. I then curled my first strip around the rim and to the side. I continued with each strip, wrapping it around the edge and working down all the arms around the rim. While the strips are still wet, I can adjust, reposition, and clean them up as needed. Here's one I made earlier where I carved a false band under the strips along with triangles to appear as grasses draped over the sides. I then drew and painted the chickadees. I glazed the top with clear glaze and strategically glazed around the chickadees with my white liner glaze for this cute piece. Now here's a variation on that previous theme where I threw a vase with a tall, wet rim. I divided the top of the rim into 1/16 as well as marking the bottom rim parallel to the top. I took a bamboo skewer and marked the first top point diagonal to one of the points along the bottom edge. I continued this all the way around. I used my X-Acto knife to cut along each of those lines. Making sure the arms are still soft and pliable, I folded down each one of them so they're slanted over the rim, but I didn't attach them yet. I rearranged them until I was happy with their placement. I used a damp sponge over the top and sides of each arm to clean them up a bit. When I was happy with them, then I attached them to the side. Now I didn't like the length of the arms, so I cut them down and removed the excess clay. I like that much better. That rim gives the pot dimension, movement, and playfulness. Thinking along that same theme of a tall rim split, I wanted to try and see if I could braid a rim. Again, I started with a freshly thrown pot and soft rim. I divided it into 1/16 along the top and bottom edge of the rim. I marked each line, this time vertically. I used an X-Acto to cut them into strips. The rim on this pot was thrown intentionally thinner as I thought it would be easier to manipulate, but leaving the rim thicker may be the better way to go, which you'll see in a minute. I started by folding the first strip inward and at an angle. I folded the next strip outward and over the first strip. I continued with this pattern all the way around, folding the strips down over themselves and beginning to tuck the ends down under the previous strip. I slowly continued gently folding each strip, reinforcing any places that wanted to crack with my wet fingers until I got this neat braided look. Here's one I made earlier, where the clay was thicker along that tall rim of the jar when I threw it. This creates a tighter braid amongst each strip so that the appearance is much more woven. I continued this texture by carving down the body of the pot to give it that same movement. I glazed the braid with my white liner glaze, then used Amico Smoke Celadon over the bottom section, which breaks over the texture for a heavy appearance to balance the heaviness of the large braid along the top. Let me know in the comments section below which of these rooms was your favorite. Thanks to the newest members of our Little Street Pottery Research Facility team. If you'd like to join the team and earn a title, click on the Super Thanks button or the link to buy me a coffee. It also really helps us out if you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. See you next time in the studio.